Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMB Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550. And our website is lifecoachdanamzlag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our second episode of season 6, a very special guest, William Allen. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. William, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. I appreciate you having me on. As you said, I am I'm an author who has written several books on personality trait called high sensitivity, or technically it's sensory processing sensitivity. And I actually had a career in information technology. I retired a few years ago. Started a small business in Bend, Oregon, doing what I call hypno coaching, working with people. I do have an undergraduate degree in psychology, but like I said, my career was in information technology. I did the hypno coaching and also did neurofeedback brain training with people, which I really enjoyed and loved working with people. I have this personality characteristic called high sensitivity. And my books were written specifically to talk about that characteristic in relationship to being a man. It's very often, culturally, we don't like to associate terms like sensitivity with men, especially men don't want to associate it with it because there's all these connotations that go along with what you're supposed to be as a man, and also what sensitivity means to most people. So with the book and coming on podcasts like yours, I like to be able to sit down and talk to people or talk with the host about what sensitivity really is, and to try to get some clarity around the definition of it, and to help sensitive people out there. You know, I'm sure you have listeners who are highly sensitive, because it is like 20% of the human population has this personality trait. So there's people, either your listeners know or they are highly sensitive people and maybe haven't learned enough about it to come to understand it, so they feel good about the trait and what the purpose of the trait is and so forth, and why they have it. So that's been my background. The last couple of years, I've been writing a blog on thesensitiveman.com. I write about sensitivity. Write about in relationships to men, and also just generally about the trait. As I see topics come up, I try to tackle them and research them and write what I do. A couple of years ago, I had enough blog articles, enough material, enough research stuff that I wrote a book called Confessions of a Sensitive Man. And it was my life journey. It was about my story growing up. And you know, this trait has only been recently discovered. It's been with humanity forever, but it's only been recently discovered in the last maybe 25, 30 years. And I didn't have the benefit of having that when I was growing up. So I was kind of struggling with who I was and why I was different and what this sensitivity meant. And was really relieved to find out in the mid 90s up to the early 2000s, when I found out about Dr. Elaine Aron's work on high sensitivity, that it was a trait and it's normal. It's not a dysfunction, and it's not a disorder. So that was a big relief to me. But even then, I still had some problems because, you know, I didn't want to associate myself with being sensitive because I was a man. And I thought, okay, I've got to come to grips with that. And then over the years, I've come to grips with it. I write about it now. I'm very proud of the trait. Don't mind telling people that I'm sensitive. And I love talking about it. So that's my lead in. Hopefully that's enough background on me.
Yes, absolutely, William. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So I'm going to start asking you some question related to, well, we will not call this a disorder at all. You being highly sensitive, does it mean that everything that everyone says you will take it personally?
Well, not everything. Everyone says, in the course of my life, I had to learn to differentiate things that were, at an earlier time in my life, I might have taken as attacks on my personality, attacks on me, and start learning about differentiating between the fact that somebody speaks in a maybe a more coarse way, and what I would call maybe a little bit insensitive to what other people are thinking. But you have to learn to take that as you go through life. You're going to have some people who don't know you, don't know that you react a little bit more to a lot of the subtle cues that people give in their, when they dialogue with you. So for example, highly sensitive people are very aware of these body cues, tonality, the way the voice goes up and down, maybe the loudness, the pitch of the voice. And so by picking up on these cues, you got to understand that gets integrated into what the person says to you. So what seems like being hypersensitive about criticism is actually just pulling in a bunch of data that most other people don't pick up that highly sensitive people do. And that's part of why I want to talk about the trait of sensitivity, because it's to help other people understand people who are sensitive. And you're right, it is something you have, you're going to go out in life and everybody's not going to agree with you. Everybody's not going to be your best friend. Everybody's not going to be and speak in such a way that they don't offend you from time to time. You got to learn to adapt with that. And that's part of the things I talk about in my books. Some of the things that, I've had to learn. You had to just sort of throttle some of this reaction that we have naturally sometimes.
Now, would you sense sarcasm better than someone who may not? Because obviously, like you said, tonality, the way that people deliver their message. So some may sense, or some, if those who knows you, would they think that, oh, well, if we talk to William, it's like walking on eggshell.
Well, I've had people tell me that before. And let me just step back a second, Dan, and talk about the four main characteristics of high sensitivity. So at least we have a working knowledge of what we're dealing with when we're talking about this personality trait. As I said, about 20% of the population has it. Half are male, half are female. Okay, so it's not a gender-based trait. It's both sides of the coin here. There are four main characteristics. This is evidence-based scientific information I'm talking about. And Dr. Aaron describes it with this acronym, DOES, DOES. D stands for depth of processing. Now, when we were talking earlier, I was telling you about picking all these little nuances out of what somebody says. Well, highly sensitive people have this capacity to deep process on things. So, for example, it's not shallow processing like a lot of people do with the information they get in. When you think about deeply processing, it goes way down in, it gets churned a lot over and over again, thought over, processed, looked at, examined, questioned. So when somebody says something, let's say you said your example, looking at me and said, well, it was a sarcastic remark, and it was clear to me that it was sarcastic. Then the things that go through my head are, what did I say wrong? Did I deserve that? Was that really a sarcastic remark, or was that something else? Was it a joke? And a lot of times that information has no answer, because maybe the person gave you the sarcastic remark and left the room. You don't know, right? But you're still dealing with it at a very deep level. So that's one characteristic of highly sensitive people, is that we're deep processors. Doesn't have to be just sarcastic remarks. It could be any kind of data we get in, okay? Second letter is O.
Are you still there?
By the amount of information we deal with. We get a lot of sensory information in. It's like an aperture on a camera. Our aperture is a little more wide open than 80% of the population's is. And so we pick up more stuff. We pick up those cues that other people are missing, right? That would tell us there's something about what that person is saying in their body language, the way they're looking at me, the expression on their face, et cetera, et cetera. So the tendency is when you're processing all that information is it gets to be overwhelming at times. And this happens quite a bit to highly sensitive people. And there's an offshoot to that is learning how to deal with overwhelm, learning how to deal with overstimulation, because it's something that's a learned skill, right? But that's something that happens with highly sensitive people quite a bit. A lot of people see that and they immediately think, well, these guys are moody, they're overreaction all the time, emotionally, that kind of stuff. That's the reason why. It's there because we're wired that way. And this information we're getting and processing overwhelms us. The E stands for emotional reactivity. We're more emotional than other people. We have deeper emotions, means we fall in love harder, that we get hurt easier, those kind of things. But that's the way our wiring is for processing emotion as well. It's much deeper emotion. The other half of that E is empathy. We're very empathetic people. So because of the mirror neurons in our brain that kind of allow all of us, not just highly sensitive people, to be communicative and social animals. Those mirror neurons mirror back what the person is telling us. And ours, I don't know if it's quantitative or qualitative, but ours kind of work in overdrive. And that makes us more empathetic to people. So if somebody's saying something sarcastic to me, using your example, maybe I'm feeling something else about that. Maybe I feel that I had a connection with them and now they said this to me and I don't understand why. And so that hurts, right? Or maybe I'm empathizing with their anger, maybe their pain, something like that. So that's also an emotion I got to deal with as well. Okay. The last letter, and we'll wrap it up with the definition here, is S, and that stands for sensing the subtle in the environment, right? We pick out those cues, we pick out those things from our sensory organs, and we're picking out more of that information than most people do. That also can be overwhelming. So for example, say somebody who is less sensitive in terms of this personality character. It is a spectrum, by the way, that goes from low sensitivity to about 20% of the population, middle section of sensitivity, and then there's high sensitive. Somebody who's less sensitive stuff will roll off their back. They're not even paying attention to the other stuff. So the reason they don't react is because it's not even in their awareness. They're not paying attention to it, right? It's not a good or bad thing. It's just the way it is. So when you sum up all these things together, there's kind of a reason why highly sensitive people react the way they do. We are neurologically wired this way. And I like the way Dr. Aaron puts this. There's an evolutionary reason why 20% of the population has this trait. If it wasn't useful, it would have been eliminated 100,000 years ago, or maybe 1,000,000 years ago, right? It is useful. And the reason it's useful is because we sense more of the data, we sense more of the environment, we're affected more by the environment. And that's kind of the canary in the coal mine thing. We're supposed to be those people that are the good advisors, the wise counselors, that kind of, a lot of therapists, a lot of doctors, a lot of helping professions, teachers are highly sensitive people for that very reason. So going long way to answer your question, I wanted to kind of get that definition out there because that really level sets what sensitivity is. It isn't because people are just moody, they're brats, they don't get along with people, they don't play well. They're wired this way, and they're wired this way for a reason. And yes, many of us overreact, and many of us do. When someone says something, get hurt and bothered by it. And part of that is on our side. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up in different places that I'm talking is that people can see, oh, that's the way I am. What can I do to kind of settle and smooth that out a little bit? How can I not be so affected? How can I calm my mind down? These are all things that you don't know unless you know what it is that this personality trait that you carry. And so that's one of the reasons why I like talking about this subject and bringing it up and explaining the definition.
Thank you so much for the clarification, William. Now, is this, let's say this personality trait, is it often misdiagnosed as bipolar?
It's misdiagnosed a lot of ways. one of the studies that I saw, they talked about very often, especially for children, it's misdiagnosed as autism. It's been misdiagnosed as schizophrenia. It's been, I mean, bipolar, I'm sure, and probably other things, because it's not well understood, even amongst the community of people who provide therapy. We really do need to get out and get more information to those people who provide helping services to people, because it is very easily misdiagnosed. And of course, the person who's being diagnosed, who has high sensitivity, is may not know about the trait themselves. So they don't go into therapy saying, oh, by the way, I'm a highly sensitive person. Do you understand what the trait is? Because that will shape the way you provide therapy for them, or the way that you will help them. And you won't immediately go into thinking, okay, this way or that way. You'll at least put that into perspective when you're talking with them.
Now, is there a difference? And I'm sure a lot of people may wonder, and I think this is a term that people hear more often than highly sensitive, which is hypersensitivity. Is there a difference between the hypersensitivity and the highly sensitive?
Yes, there is. And hypersensitivity it's a disorder, and it has, I think, very often associated with things like autism as well, because of the fact that there is some disconnect going on between the sensory organs and what the brain is processing. Okay. And it tends to be something that's dysfunctional. High sensitivity is really more, and to really explain this with a finer point, sensory processing sensitivity is the term for high sensitivity. It is part of an umbrella of a theory, a much greater theory called environmental sensitivity theory. That theory is all about how the organism reacts to the environment they're in. Okay, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Sensory processing sensitivity, it rolls up into that as a model for a type of people, or how people react to the environment. So if you think about it like that, instead of maybe being too amplified, it's the idea that there are some people who have low reactivity to the environment, right? We talked about the spectrum. They're more resilient. They bounce back easier. That's part of the spectrum. The middle ground, they're a little bit more, they're a little less resilient than those people, but not as like the highly sensitive people are. And then there's the highly sensitive people where the environment makes a heck of a difference. Things make a difference for highly sensitive people. The temperature of the room, the smells, what things taste like, how they feel, that kind of stuff can affect them. And sometimes it seems like it borders on hypersensitive. And maybe in some cases, because there's over 1.5 billion HSPs, highly sensitive people out there, that it might cross, pollinate there, and you may have some of that. And I'm not to say that highly sensitive people don't have issues either. I mean, there is a tendency to be more, have more depressive episodes, and also to be more anxious. And these are things that highly sensitive people, I think, can deal with if they learn about the trait, and learn how to calm their minds, and learn how to deal with the trait in a much more productive way.
Actually, you just somewhat addressed my next question, William, which was, are highly sensitive people more prone to anxiety and depression?
Yes, they are. Most definitely are. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that they're not really understanding their own personality. They're not understanding the signals they're getting from their sensory organs, the deep processing, and the overwhelm. It can be very depressing if you feel isolated and alone, and you don't know what to do. There's lots of great books out there, by therapists and people who work with highly sensitive people to help them in terms of calming their mind. One of the main things I really try to drill in my books is the idea of learning to brain train. And brain train means a lot of things. I used a neurofeedback tool that was developed by 2 psychologists that really helped a lot of my clients relax, calm down, help their brain be a little more resilient. But there's many, many other different ways of doing that. A lot of it has to do with things like mindfulness training, meditation, learning to calm yourself, breathing exercises, getting involved in things that will, I always like to suggest getting involved in things that get you into a flow state where your mind is concentrated on something, where time and space sort of kind of disappear and your focus is on doing a task and getting that accomplished. There's a lot of wellness that comes out of doing that kind of thing. So there's lots of activities that you can do. But if you feel like you're helpless and, when you're in an overwhelmed situation, I think a lot of people who are highly sensitive, don't know about the trait, will wind up going south in terms of there's something wrong with me, I'll never get over this, blah, blah, blah. And you know where that leads. The thoughts lead one after another into kind of depression, or even just being anxious all the time.
Understood. Now, here's two questions in one, William, okay? Is it possible that someone develops highly sensitivity because of an external factor that occurred and that made them become the way? Or is it something that you're born with? Or in retrospect, can you eliminate that trait from your life by doing the exercises that you mentioned with meditation, breathing, etc.? Can you not become, or can you go from highly sensitive to low sensitivity?
Well, let me go back to your first part of your question. It is a genetic trait, largely genetic, but it's one of those things that can be exacerbated by your environment. Okay, studies have shown that highly sensitive people who are raised in supportive, nurturing environments where they are valued and appreciated, they not only do well, they do exceptionally well, much more so than anybody else on the spectrum, because that's what they need in order to excel and utilize their gifts. If they're in a bad environment, which a lot of highly sensitive people have been through,
it makes it worse.
It makes it even worse. It could, the analogy, the metaphor they use is orchids. The flower, they would say highly sensitive people sort of represent are orchids. And if an orchid isn't taken care of just perfectly, they wilt. So that's part of the problem, is the environment that highly sensitive children grow up and grow in, that can exacerbate it. Now, to your point about can you ameliorate it to the point where you're a low sensitive person, I think that's always going to be with you. It's the way your brain's wired neurologically. So the thing I suggest is that people learn to deal with the way that your brain is wired. Mm-hmm. It's actually quite a gift. Some of the most creative people that we have, actors, writers, poets, artists, religious leaders, even some politicians, believe it or not, are highly sensitive people and are very creative. That gift of being sensory, having this great sensory awareness and awareness of the environment, gives them great ideas and insights. That deep processing makes it easy for people to see connections between things that nobody else does. Mm-hmm. It's valuable in that sense. But if you grew up in an environment where you were not valued, where you were told you're too sensitive, too emotional, you're not good, you need to straighten up, you need to change, that's not going to help a person who has this particular personality trait. It wouldn't help anybody, to be honest with you, whether they have HSP or not. But to your point, you can probably learn to ameliorate some of these reactions that you have, especially if they're extreme. But you'll always be highly sensitive. You're always going to have that trait. The idea is to be mindful of it, as you mentioned earlier on about people reacting to criticism, especially. Learn to be mindful of it. And I always used to say, go with the flow and let it flow through you and out of you in the back. Realize if it's valuable to you, then you can absorb it. If it's not valuable to you, if it's a constructive criticism, it's a good thing. You want to absorb that and learn from it. If it's abrasive or not constructive criticism, harmful, let it flow through and realize it's not you. Okay, it's the other person. So that's what I would say about the idea. It is a genetic trait, and it is affected by the environment. But for the most part, I don't think people are never going to ever not be highly sensitive that we're born that way.
Now, for one last question, William, and I'm sure that a lot of people out there who are dating and looking for relationship. And I know this is not a question to address on your first date, but is it hard to be married or to get into a relationship with a highly sensitive person? Are they more prone to divorce or to breakups?
From what I understand, because that was a good question I asked, and I kind of had to go to Dr. Aaron's blog and find out what she said about it. There isn't a greater propensity for divorce with highly sensitive people, but I will say this, and I've said this in the book, and from my own experience, is that highly sensitive people should be pretty selective about who they connect with. And it's not only for their benefit, but the benefit of the other person, because a lot of people will never understand the trait, will never be comfortable with it. Again, the old eggshell, walking on eggshells thing, and it can go both ways. So I would say be very careful and very selective when you're going out and you're in the dating world. You need to figure out what I used to call, when I was dating, to figure out some questions that I would ask them that would give me some indication about what kind of person they are. It might be things like, what was your relationship with your parents? Because, your parents are the first people that teach you about love because they're there. And if you have a bad relationship with them, well, they may not be the person that you want to be involved with. Maybe some other things where they are on spirituality and politics and stuff, because politics is really, as much as divisive as it is a reflection of your core values. So you want to be sure you're with somebody that is, lining up with you, at least in a way where you can get along with them. But I'd be very careful. Now, here's a tip. Dr. Aaron and her husband, Arthur Aaron, are two of the leading authorities on love, okay, and in the world, all right, top 10. And they have she had written a book on HSPs and love. It would be a great book for any highly sensitive person to read, to get an understanding. And they did a lot of comparisons between, should you be with somebody who's an HSP or should you be with a non-HSP? And they did male, female, and all the combinations. That would be a good place to start to look for it. But again, to your point, I'd be very cautious about when I'm dating. I would say don't go out and get out there in the world and find a partner, but just be very careful about it, because they may have difficulty understanding you. And certainly the more you understand yourself, it's easier to explain yourself to other people as well.
Now, would you say, based on your research, William, would you say that highly sensitive people and narcissistic personality people are the complete opposite spectrum from each other, which is kind of like day or night?
Here's the ironic thing about that. I personally believe that that is true. And I would think that most narcissists would probably fall in the low sensitive category because they're less empathetic and so forth. But the interesting, ironic thing is the two attract each other.
Correct. Yes, I was about
the
to.
The narcissist seeks out people that are like the highly sensitive person because they're more empathetic and they want to, help. And they see the narcissistic person and think, okay, I need to be there for them and that kind of thing. The narcissist sees the HSP as a sucker and uses them, exploits them. So it's kind of one of those codependency type things where they tend to go together, and it's just really odd that they do, but it does happen.
But so if two people that are highly HSP, so would you say that there's a lot of chance for that relationship to work because minus and minus makes a positive?
I ultimately, at the end of the day, all relationships depend on the two individuals, regardless of their personality traits. But I've thought about that quite a bit. For me in my life, I don't think I've ever been with a highly sensitive person. And I don't know, it might be a little too much, having too much sensitivity floating around in a relationship. But I'm sure that what would be an advantage is that a highly sensitive person and a highly sensitive person would at least understand their personality trait much greater and be more aware of it. And that might make it easier for them to navigate through problems and issues and so forth. Again, it probably is individual by individual, more than anything else. But that would be my take on it, is that make sure your partner to be is aware of your trait and aware of your personality. It's not like you're saying, well, this is my dysfunction, here it is. What you're saying is you're giving them a shot over the bow. Oh no, so this is who I am. And it has its great positive sides, and it has some obstacles and challenges to it as well. And if that's something you're not interested in, then we probably should move on.
Beautiful. Where can people find your books, William?
Right now, they're all both books are on Amazon. They're on Barnes and Noble and Apple Books. You can get them just about anywhere there's a online retailer right now. You can also go to my website, thesensitiveman.com, and I have links directly to the publisher. You can get them there as well. The print copy of the latest book isn't out yet, but you can get it directly from the publisher if you go to my website.
And that's Confession of an HSP.
The first book is Confessions of a Sensitive Man, and the second book is called On Being a Sensitive Man. So the second book is more of a guidebook, things that I've learned, things that I've found over the course of my life, and I kind of put them together as kind of a toolkit for men and highly sensitive people generally to use to help them navigate things.
So it's more into practicality, which means that if you feel a certain emotion, this is what you do to be able to alleviate the symptoms. Well, not symptom, but more the behaviors. Is that correct?
Yeah. How to deal with overwhelm. The environment is so important. So looking for the right job, looking for the right partner, looking for those kind of things, and being selective and where you live, how you live. And that helps quite a bit too.
Beautiful. Well, William, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story and condition. I would say, if we could call this a condition. Now, we hope that you have all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 6 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you're listening to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom from a great author, Melanie Coloris. Life is so short. We spend so much time sweating the small stuff, worrying, complaining, gossiping, comparing, wishing, wanting, and waiting for something bigger and better instead of focusing on all the simple blessing that surrounds us every day. Life is so fragile, and all it takes is a single moment to change everything we take for granted. Focus on what's important and be grateful. You are blessed. Believe it, feel it, enjoy it. Live your life and leave no regrets. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.